It's over. LBGTQ, elemental PQIZ, it is over. I am not telling another joke about you until we are both sure that we are laughing together.
Yeah, maybe you should have thought of that before you made this special. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel in which I talk about whatever's on my mind. My name is Isaiah, and for the purposes of this video in particular, I'd like to reintroduce myself as a 28-year-old non-binary trans man who happens to be white and who happened to be wanting to create something about the Proverbs wife, the Proverbs 31 woman, until I got in an argument with someone on Reddit about Dave Chappelle's newest Netflix documentary. Admittedly, I got into the conversation without actually watching it. I'd only seen a few third party sources where it was pretty obvious to me that he was calling himself a TERF and aligning himself with the likes of J.K. Rowling, and it wasn't a joke. But I guess when I'm having a discussion or an argument with someone, even if I know they're being blatantly just disingenuous and it's in bad faith, I want to come at it from a place of good faith. So, setting aside my 15 tabs that are open about Proverbs 31, 10 through 31, and I cracked open Netflix, stopped watching You, and cracked open Minecraft because I was like, this is going to be an hour, so it's going to take a while. Started watching and bumped it up to 1.5 speed because he talks so slowly. And if I needed to get through this, I needed to get through it because I ended up taking a lot of notes. Now, I should mention I haven't actually watched any videos on the feedback. I've only seen a couple of headlines, particularly the ones about the Netflix walkout and demonstration and all that stuff. And I've seen a couple of videos. I haven't clicked on them, which is sad because I really want to watch Jessie Gender's opinion on this because she is a fantastic person who goes more into depth about certain things than I could possibly hope for, given that I post these videos daily and I try to just do it more off the cuff. This is my opinion sort of deal. But I decided I didn't want to be influenced by anything more than the couple of headlines I saw and my own feelings on the hour special. I will also say I have not watched his older videos or his older specials because I watched The Closer and I decided I didn't want to watch anything else by him because if this is him taking a step back, I'd hate to see what he was when he was going after the LGBT community, the queer community, more prevalently. I will also say the little clip that I'm including at the start is the ending of his show. I thought it was ironic that he was saying that at the end, and I had to include it. So, let me pull open my notes. I think I died in Minecraft like 3 times just because I needed to keep writing things down. So, we'll get past my little grocery list. And let's start at the beginning, where he starts making jokes about COVID. This is obviously a post pandemic world. So, of course, he's making jokes. He's just also happens to be not very funny. One of the things I can say through this entire thing is I didn't laugh a single time. And I was expecting to be able to laugh at least one or two jokes. I may not have a very funny personality myself, but I've had crushes and went out with people that were comedians, and I found their humor, even some of the darker stuff, to be quite humorous. And you can tell good trans jokes. I laugh all the time at some really shitty dark humor from transgender circle jerk. Don't go there if you're vulnerable because otherwise it's just digital self harm. But I laugh at some of it because it's true. But yeah, there was some stuff in the beginning where he's just making these jokes about COVID. Um, and he was talking about how when he was in quarantine because he had COVID, even though he showed no symptoms, he was totally fine. He was stuck in a room and he was watching videos about black people beating up Asian people. And he was like, well, I feel like that's what's going on the inside of my body. And I was like, okay, cool. I don't find that funny, but I'm also not a black person, so maybe that joke was targeted towards the black community. There was also a weird Clifford joke about like black men with a black giant of a man with a white name, and then he gets shot. But I don't know. I didn't find it funny. The audience clearly did. If you found it funny, maybe you can explain it to me. Maybe I'm missing something because my brain is too literal. But he spent most of his hour talking about the gay community, the queer community. He and it started off with stuff about this comedian called DaBaby, who apparently has been canceled by the queer community. I really don't know anything about him. I didn't even look it up. I decided to look up something else before I recorded this video. I was just like, this is such a nothing burger for me. Um, but he apparently been canceled by the gay community or holding him hostage or something like that, according to Chappelle. And um, he made the comment that the baby has killed a man in Walmart and it didn't affect his career, but he started making jokes that targeted gay people and now he's in trouble. As if you can't be equally upset about both things. Like, it is really shitty that the baby got away with killing someone, if this is true. But it's not on the queer community to, like, create a roster of sin or whatever. They're allowed to be mad that he's making gay jokes. And you're allowed to be mad that he killed a black person. In all likelihood, again, I didn't look into it, but considering the way the internet works and how far back people are willing to go to dig up dirt, I am positive that DaBaby's murder got listed into one of the reasons why he's such an awful person. And you are just punching at the gay community for having a voice when they have nothing to do with the fact that he got away with murder. Okay? So let me just erase some of these points so I know where I am at. Then he also mentioned how black people are jealous of gay people and how if slaves had booty shorts and baby oil back in the day, maybe they could have been liberated 100 years earlier, completely ignoring the fact that there is a great intersectionality between black oppression and queer oppression, and also black people. This is bad. Slavery was technically eradicated and the Joe Crow laws were technically abolished before gay people had a right to marry. I am not saying that there are not struggles that black people are dealing with to this day. I literally made a video a couple of days ago talking about how, because of how and where I grew up, I have these prejudices that I have been having to actively unlearn after moving to a city that has a much greater population of black people than what I am used to. And that was still when I thought I was not a racist person and only discovered that I still have these biases that were embedded in me from childhood because of how and where I grew up. So no, black people do not have it easy. But it seems redundant to start pitting black oppression and queer oppression against each other like only one of us can win. Or that queer people have a one-up over black people because we've suddenly had this burst of acceptance recently. And then BLM started because if you remember, gay marriage, 2016, BLM, after, because it's continuing. I can't just say 1 year because it's been building up and it's still going. And of course, he may be back in my day, the gays weren't so brittle and all that stuff. And then he started talking about how glory holes are apparently a gay thing, when the first time I ever heard of a glory hole, it was a very much heterosexual thing. So let's just go ahead and get rid of that. Talked about being filmed during COVID times. A woman walked over and started talking to him without a mask on, and he noticed he was being filmed by another table, and he was like, "Oh, they're filming me, so if I have an overreaction, they can cancel me." And then he's like, "Oh, so they must be gay," because when he stood up, he noticed that one of the men had fingernail polish, and started joking about how the man had his shirt pulled up into like a pseudo crop top sort of deal. And it's like, cool. He did make one good point of gay people, and I'm going to specifically say cis gay people are minorities until they need to be white again. I agree. I've noticed a lot of troubling instances in the community where, I mean, let's just look at lesbian turfs. Is that real? That's and let's look at gay men who use their gayness to be toxic towards women, and vice versa. But I don't think that's a very good thing to just drop in there amidst all this other shit and not have a discussion about it. It's something that needs to be discussed, preferably by gay people. Let's see. There's also the fact that he used individual people, incidences that he's had, and then he's propagating that towards the entire community. And he does that for good and bad. He does the "I have one black friend." It just happened to be a trans woman who is now dead. The lesbian looks like a dude. The "I am famous and I'm still being bothered by all this shit." Feminism. Feminist is a fugly dyke. One black female friend of his speaks for all POC women about the Me Too movement. He tries to discuss about how there is a lack of intersectionality in feminism, a very good point, but then he immediately follows it up with, because all these female celebrities were talking to him, he is like, all right, well, I cancel you because I'm not going to jerk off to you anymore. Let's see. A trans woman can't pass because he's looking in the crowd for hairy knuckles and Adam's apples. A they joke, even though the Shakespearean they has been around since Shakespeare's times. Restroom laws. Joking about being rich while talking about going to Walmart and seeing a trans woman pull her dick out, which is okay. Then starts getting into the real meat of it, really talking about the transgender issues. So we're going to start with this. I'm going to skip past the bathroom jokes because that is old hat at this point. But there's been a constant in his speech about like, oh, I'm sure that was a woman, I'm sure that was a trans, because he's talking about seeing these tells, the Adam's apples, the hairy knuckles, the sharp jaw lines that are very masculine, quote unquote. So I did quote once where he's like, I'm sure it was a woman. And then mentions how he met this woman who is talking about her daughter coming home for the holidays. Daughter's out in Hollywood. And he's like, I know what your daughter in Hollywood is doing to get through things. And it's like, gross. And this woman pulls out a photo of her daughter, and he's like, oh, she's very beautiful, as you do when you're polite. Now, he'd already been called out for being transphobic in the past, and apparently this woman knew him because then she was like, oh, by the way, she's trans. I'm sure he was being hyperbolic, so I'm speaking more how I imagine she might have actually said if she was trying to trap them. And he got really annoyed with that, apparently, because he wanted to tell her that Her daughter was hideous. Let's see. More talking about the same woman going to a bar. There's three people. He notices the trans woman from the photo and a couple of obviously gay black men, saying that they have the 1980s gay face. He then was like, okay, I'm going to keep her cover. He's kind of drunk and starts calling her woman and all this stuff. And it's like, congrats, I heard you're going out to Hollywood. Good job with all your hard work, and making a point of gendering her correctly because I don't know how serious this was because he was saying this in the joking tone. And jokes are supposed to be funny, but I didn't find this funny because he sounded like he was singling out a trans woman in a situation that he might have thought was going to be dangerous for her. And this woman called him out on his shit, and he got upset, and because she was just talking. Apparently, this was a white trans woman, because she was talking about how the trans people are her people and yada yada yada. And he's looking at the two gay black men, supposedly gay black men, like, hey, are you going to say something? Why is she saying my people? Because apparently, only POC minorities are allowed to say my people. Then he's like, I've never had a problem with trans people. Right after trashing this woman for so long about the fact that she's trans, she doesn't pass, her mother is a little too doting, and all of that stuff. And also joking specifically about how he's been trying to have discussions about race and stuff for a long time, and then suddenly white people just change the rules. It's like, hey, you can't talk shit about me anymore because, by the way, now I'm a woman. Like, we can just suddenly choose to become the opposite gender. He also says gender is a fact, and that leads into some of the TERF stuff because he was like saying he was looking up some of this stuff and he found TERF being a acronym for trans exclusionary radical feminist, and he's like, well, I'm not a woman, but I am a feminist, this sort of thing. And he's like, yeah, these trans people can be super scary. They've canceled people way bigger than me. They canceled J.K. Rowling, which is where I saw those headlines that he's pro-TERF. And he was like, I read J.K. Rowling's thing, and she was just saying gender is a fact. And I agree, gender is a fact. Right after he said that the whites are changing the rules and just declaring the gender that they want to be. I don't know how much work he personally puts into his comedy routines. I have seen the notes of some of my former friends from Huntsville's comedy scene, and they will work extensively and workshop it, and it can take hours. I would imagine for an hour special that's getting broadcast out to everybody who owns Netflix, he would have put weeks, months into it. But from those two tonal things, it sounds like he put maybe 30 minutes on the back of a napkin. Didn't even bother using the notes function of his phone. Because you're like, I don't have a problem with trans people. I mean, they're just white people that are constantly changing the rules. They're brittle. And also, gender is a fact. It just is. J.K. Rowling is right. Completely ignoring trans men during this entire thing. Well, no. Correction. He mentions trans men back when he made the joke about the bathrooms. I didn't mention it because, again, there's a restroom shit's old hat at this point, and I don't want to go into it. It's so dumb. But he was like, I would have been more comfortable with a trans woman standing next to me at a urinal rather than a trans man standing next to me at a urinal. And specifically, he said backing up to a urinal, and he'd be like, why is this dude peeing out of his butt? And it's like, cool. You realize that trans women and trans men are not super likely to use a urinal unless the trans man has something that enables him to use it. Like a prosthetic that allows him to pee through it, also known as an STP, a stand to pee, or he's had surgery where he will have a dick and you wouldn't even notice. I don't know, as a trans man, that really bothered me. Anyway, he also made a not joke about it being easier for Bruce Jenner to change his gender than Cassius Clay to change his name, which is weird because Muhammad Ali is from like the 60s and Caitlyn Jenner is from these days. And not only did he misgender Caitlyn Jenner, but then he gender her partially correctly later. But why are you comparing a 60s figure to modern day when there's been a lot of shit that's happened between now and then? If you compared Muhammad Ali to someone from his heyday, from his one of his contemporaries, like Marsha Johnson or something, you would definitely see his entire argument fall apart because the 60s weren't very nice to trans people. You mentioned that in your sketch, Dave Chappelle. You talked about how you thought the Stonewall trans and Stonewall queers were a hell of a lot thicker skinned than the queers today. Or did you forget that because it was 30 minutes ago and you're making this up as you're going along? He says he's pro-TERF because TERFs are like he is towards stuff like blackface. And it's like, they don't hate trans women. Oh, well, they do hate trans women because they're just doing an impression of womanhood. Gender is a fact, remember? Except we whites are completely changing the rules every single time he tries to get on to white people about their whiteness. And again, he compares trans women to doing blackface. It's the blackface of womanhood, according to him. How is this so much fun? How is this funny? I'd really like to know how this is funny. Like, I can't see it even in a dark humor sort of way. And I don't know if that's simply because this is a cis rich man making fun of trans people and siding with a rich white cis woman, or if it's not funny. Anyway, gender is a fact. I remind you of that. Then starts talking about Caitlyn Jenner again. This is when he partially genders her correctly. I'm not defending Caitlyn Jenner. She's a piece of shit. About as much of a piece of shit as Blair White, by the by. There are shitty trans people out there. But it seems dumb to shit on Caitlyn Jenner for becoming Woman of the Year, which I don't know if she had a hand in getting herself nominated Woman of the Year the first year she came out and transitioned. But saying that for women to see Caitlyn Jenner be seen as Woman of the Year is akin to Eminem being given a black record or black, oh god, it's like the BET Awards, because Eminem happens to be a rapper, but he's white. So the fact that Caitlyn Jenner's never had a period, but she's been named Woman of the Year, I mean, let's not even think about that. Let's just focus on for a second that he's basically saying all women who've never had a period aren't women. There are women, cis women, that have medical issues, Dave Chappelle. And then he also is like, every person on this earth has had to pass through the legs of a woman to be here. I hate to tell you this, Dave Chappelle, but you remember how you talked about a trans man backing up to use a urinal next to you and you being okay with it? There are some people born through the legs of a man because they are trans. Yeah? And by the way, just because a vagina was constructed for someone doesn't make it an impossible burger of a vagina. The fact that the woman attached to it is infertile means jack shit. Because are you going to sleep with a woman because she's fertile? I don't think so. I think you're sleeping with a woman because she's hot and you're attracted to her. And maybe kids comes up later. Then he pulls the ultimate I have a black friend, bringing up this trans comedian that committed suicide a little after his Sticks and Stones routine. Her name is Daphne. Let's ignore the fact that he periodically misgenders her. Let's ignore the fact that he's using this woman to make a point after she's gone. Let's talk about the fact that he tries to tie her suicide into this online harassment she got because after his Sticks and Stones performance, the LGBT community, the queer community, came out against him and she defended him on Twitter. So, just like we do with Caitlyn Jenner and just like we do with Blair White, we turned on her. And no, it's not a good thing to bully someone who doesn't have a platform. And Daphne, for all her faults and all her strengths, she was not a public figure like Caitlyn Jenner and Blair White are. She is an individual. Who happened to be defending someone with this horrible jokes. I get it. We all have terrible taste in jokes sometimes. I make terrible jokes to Briar constantly, and it's funny because it's funny to us. It wouldn't be funny out in public if we were just talking to each other and I put my hand on Briar's throat and it's like, this is abuse, and Briar's like, oh, it is abuse, just kill me. And it's funny to us, but it's not funny to anyone outside because they don't have the setup for it. And for Daphne, she had a relationship with Dave Chappelle, and then she committed suicide. And he tries to tie it into the Twitter bullying, but I decided to look into it. I wanted to find out if there was anything else going on in her life when she killed herself. Not out of a morbid sense of curiosity, but because this man has been trashing the trans community and trying to pass it off as a joke for half an hour. And I wanted to know if there was a grain of truth in this, because there's been little tiny grains of truth in what he's been saying, but he's been saying it so shittily that it doesn't matter. It cancels itself out. And it turns out Daphne had PTSD. She had a terrible childhood, and this 44-year-old woman killed herself. She was a trans woman with a terrible past who then got subjected to so much anger online that I'm sure there was an effect on her. But I think it's disingenuous to say that her suicide is solely at the hands of the Twitter mob, as he's putting it. He also constantly jokes about how he is transphobic because he's like, oh, I can't get too close to you, I'm transphobic, remember? And talking about Daphne during an after party, she went for a hug and he hugged her back and was like pushed her away. That's the joke. That's the entire joke. Oh, push you away because I'm transphobic, remember? And it's like, being nice to one person doesn't make you not transphobic. It's the one black friend defense. And then to end it off, he talked about how taking a man's career is the same as killing them. It's the same as abortion. And that's just where I have to leave it, because Dave Chappelle is not a good human being, in my opinion. And I think he should be done making jokes about the queer community. if only because he's an absolute hypocrite. Going to read about the Pixies incident from 2005, and this is from Time. A sketch about magic pixies that embody stereotypes about the races. The Black Pixie, played by Chappelle, wears blackface and tries to convince blacks to act in stereotypical ways. Chappelle thought the sketch was funny, the kind of thing his friends would laugh at. But at the taping, one spectator, a white man, laughed particularly loud and long. His laughter struck Chappelle as wrong, and he wondered if the new season of his show had gone from sending up stereotypes to merely reinforcing them. When he laughed, it made me uncomfortable, says Chappelle. As a matter of fact, that was the last thing I shot before I told myself I gotta take fucking time out after this, because my head almost exploded. After that, he took an early vacation to South Africa to visit a friend. And I hate to tell you this, Dave Chappelle, but you're doing it again. You're not destroying stereotypes. You're reinforcing them. And maybe it's time to stop. Because it's not funny. And you are dragging your friend's name through the mud to try and make a point that isn't even real. I'll see y'all tomorrow.